And now back to our top story. CBS News has obtained a newly released audio recording that could be a key piece of evidence in the federal government's case against Donald Trump. In it, we can hear the former president discussing secret documents at his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey. So Catherine Herridge is in Washington with more on this. Catherine, good morning.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. In the 2-minute audio recording, the former president denounces his former top military advisor, General Mark Milley, and appears to share what he describes as highly confidential and secret information involving a Defense Department plan of attack on Iran. And in the indictment, he's accused of showing the records to a small group, apparently with no security clearance.
He said he wanted to attack Iran and what? He said this was done by the military, given to me.
A newly obtained audio recording may be a key piece of evidence in special counsel Jack Smith's case that alleges former President Trump put national security at risk by mishandling classified documents.
All right, folks, you're locked in with Adam. In a dramatic courtroom moment, prosecutors played a previously unknown audio recording that visibly stunned Trump. His face went pale as his own voice discussed concealing classified documents. The tape, reportedly leaked by a cooperating witness or even a former defense lawyer, could fundamentally change the trajectory of the trial. Think about that for a second and let it really sink in, because this is absolutely huge. Someone in Trump's inner circle, someone who had direct access to private conversations and recordings that were never supposed to see the light of day or be heard by anyone outside that tight group of loyalists, made the decision that they could not stay silent anymore about what they knew and what they had witnessed. They handed over evidence that could potentially put Trump behind bars for years. That is a level of betrayal that Trump has always feared and always tried to prevent by surrounding himself with people he believed would stay loyal no matter what happened. But someone broke ranks. Someone decided that their conscience or their legal exposure or their sense of duty to the country was more important than protecting Donald Trump from the consequences of his own actions and his own words.
ABC News has obtained the audio recording of former President Trump appearing to show off secret documents he did not declassify.
I just found, isn't that amazing? This totally wins my case, you know. Except it is like highly confidential, secret.
The conversation with aides and 2 people working on an autobiography of former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows took place in 2021 at Trump's New Jersey golf club. The contents of the recording have previously been reported and are quoted in the Justice Department's indictment related to Trump's handling of classified documents after leaving office. But the recording itself has never before been heard publicly. Trump is heard railing against his former Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Mark Milley, while shuffling papers. And he references a document about attacking Iran in which Trump says Milley compiled.
The tape itself reportedly captures Trump discussing in explicit detail a legal strategy, or really, what amounts to a completely illegal strategy, to handle and hide evidence from investigators who were actively looking into his possession of classified documents after he left the White House following his first term in office. Legal experts who have heard descriptions of what is on the recording and who have analyzed the implications are saying this is textbook obstruction of justice in its clearest and most undeniable form. This is not some ambiguous conversation that could be interpreted different ways depending on your political leanings or your feelings about Trump personally. This is allegedly Trump on tape talking in his own voice about concealing evidence from a federal investigation, which is exactly the kind of conduct that gets people sent to prison, regardless of who they are or what position they hold or used to hold in the government. The reaction in that courtroom when the tape played tells you absolutely everything you need to know about how damaging this evidence really is and how seriously everyone in that room took what they were hearing.
An audio recording has emerged of Donald Trump allegedly handling papers and saying that they were highly classified. This was during a post-presidential interview. During that interview with an author who is working on a memoir of his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, Mr. Trump is heard going through the papers and saying this is highly confidential. Earlier this month, he appeared at a federal court in Miami charged with 37 counts of illegally retaining classified documents and obstructing the government's efforts to get them back. He denies the charges. Let's take a listen to the audio recording now. It was obtained by CNN.
Isn't that incredible, though?
Yeah.
I was just saying, because we were talking about it. And, you know, he said he wanted to attack Iran and what? These are the papers.
It's pretty
This was done by the military, given to me. I think we can Probably, right?
I don't know. We'll have to see. Yeah, we'll have to try to
Declassified.
figure out yeah.
See, as president, I could have declassified
Yeah.
it. Now I can't, but this is classified.
Now we have a problem.
Isn't that interesting?
The jurors, the 12 people who are actually going to decide Trump's fate in this case and determine whether he walks free or goes to prison, showed visible signs of shock and intense focused attention as the recording played through the speakers for everyone to hear. These are people who have been sitting through weeks and weeks of testimony and evidence and legal arguments from both sides. They have probably developed pretty good poker faces by now when it comes to reacting to what they hear in the courtroom. Jurors know they are being watched, and they try to stay neutral and not give away what they are thinking. But this recording broke through that professional composure in a way that was visible to everyone watching. Observers in the courtroom reported that jurors were leaning forward in their seats, straining to hear every word. Some reportedly had their mouths hanging open in apparent disbelief at what they were hearing come out of those speakers. All of them were staring with laser focus and intense concentration as Trump's own voice filled the room, describing what sounded very much like a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice and hide evidence from federal investigators.
Involving the investigation into former President Donald Trump and classified documents that he took with him when he left the White House. Multiple sources tell CNN federal prosecutors have obtained a 2021 audio recording of Trump acknowledging that he kept a classified Pentagon document about a possible attack on Iran after leaving the White House. The existence of the recording undercuts Trump's primary defense that he declassified all the documents that he brought with him from the White House to Mar-a-Lago. CNN reports the July 2021 meeting was held at Trump's golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, with two people working on the autobiography of Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, as well as Trump aides, including communications specialists Margot Martin, who, as The Guardian reports, regularly taped Trump's conversations with authors to make sure they are accurately recounting his remarks.
And Trump himself, the defendant whose freedom and future are on the line in this trial, just sat there frozen in his chair at the defense table, completely unable to move or react or do anything, as he realized in real time that his own recorded words he probably thought would never be heard by anyone outside his closest and most trusted circle of advisors and lawyers, were being used against him in open court in front of the jury that will ultimately decide whether he spends years of his life behind bars in a federal prison. His lawyers clearly understood immediately how devastating and potentially case-ending this moment was because they jumped up almost before the recording even finished playing and urgently requested an emergency recess from the judge. That is, crisis mode behavior from a defense team. That is a group of lawyers who know they just got hit with something massive that they were not prepared for and need time desperately to figure out how to respond and whether there is any possible way to minimize the catastrophic damage. When your lawyers are asking for emergency breaks in the middle of the prosecution's presentation of evidence, you know something has gone very, very wrong for your case and your chances of acquittal. All right, let us dig into the details of what we know about this recording and this extraordinary courtroom moment, because the specifics really matter for understanding just how serious this situation has become for Trump and his defense team going forward with this trial. First, let us talk about where this recording came from and how it ended up in the hands of prosecutors, because that is actually a fascinating and critically important part of the story. It tells you a lot about how cases like this unfold behind the scenes, where the public usually does not get to see what is happening until evidence shows up dramatically in open court. According to multiple reports from sources with knowledge of the investigation, the audio recording was discovered by a private investigator who was working specifically for the prosecution team to find evidence that might not have surfaced through normal investigative channels and standard law enforcement procedures. Private investigators play a really important and often underappreciated role in major criminal cases like this one, because they can sometimes access information and sources and leads that federal investigators might not think to look at or might not have the time and resources to pursue, given all the other demands on their attention. They work the edges of cases looking for things that others might have missed, and sometimes they find absolute gold, like this recording appears to be. But finding the recording is only part of the story, and honestly not even the most dramatic part. The recording reportedly came into the prosecution's hands because someone made a conscious decision to cooperate with the government and provide this devastating piece of evidence to them, knowing full well what it would mean for Trump and his defense. This is where the story gets really interesting and really troubling if you are Trump or anyone in his orbit who has been involved in these matters. According to sources with knowledge of the situation, the recording was leaked by either a cooperating witness who had been in Trump's inner circle for years and finally decided to flip and help prosecutors build their case against him, or, and this scenario would be even more dramatic and unprecedented, by a lawyer from Trump's own defense team who made the extraordinary decision to cooperate with the prosecution rather than continue defending a client they had come to believe was guilty of serious federal crimes that they could not in good conscience help him escape accountability for. Either scenario represents a massive and devastating betrayal from Trump's perspective and from the perspective of his remaining loyal supporters. Either scenario means that someone he trusted deeply, someone who had access to his most private and sensitive conversations and his most closely guarded secrets, made the decision that they could not stay silent anymore about what they knew and what they had witnessed and heard. If it was a cooperating witness from his inner circle, then Trump has to be wondering right now with increasing paranoia, who else might be talking to prosecutors behind his back, and what else they might have handed over, or might be preparing to hand over in exchange for leniency or immunity. If it was one of his own lawyers, then the implications are even more staggering and frightening for Trump, because attorney-client privilege is supposed to be one of the most sacred protections in our legal system. The fact that a lawyer would break that privilege and hand over a recording of private conversations with their client suggests they believe they had an ethical obligation or even a legal obligation to do so. Perhaps because they concluded that the privilege did not apply to communications about ongoing or future criminal conduct, which is an exception that exists in the law. There is something called the crime-fraud exception to attorney-client privilege that allows or even requires lawyers to disclose communications if those communications were made in furtherance of a crime or fraud. If Trump was using his conversations with lawyers to plan obstruction of justice, then those conversations may not be protected at all, and any lawyer who participated in them might feel legally obligated to come forward. We do not know for certain yet which scenario is correct, cooperating insider witness or flipping defense lawyer. But either one represents a major and possibly fatal crack in the wall of loyalty and secrecy that Trump has always relied on throughout his career to protect himself from legal consequences for his actions. Now, let us talk about what is actually on the tape itself, because that is ultimately what matters most for the trial and for Trump's fate when this case goes to the jury for deliberation. The recording reportedly captures Trump discussing in detail a strategy to handle and hide evidence from investigators who were actively looking into his possession of classified documents that he took with him when he left the White House. According to legal experts who have been briefed on the contents of the recording, or who have carefully analyzed detailed descriptions of what the tape contains, this is not some vague or ambiguous conversation that could be interpreted in innocent ways if you are inclined to give Trump the benefit of the doubt. This is allegedly Trump on tape explicitly talking about concealing materials from federal investigators, which is quite literally the legal definition of obstruction of justice under federal criminal statutes. Obstruction of justice is a very serious federal crime that can carry significant prison sentences even when the underlying conduct being investigated turns out not to be criminal in the end. In other words, even if Trump could somehow prove that his initial possession of the classified documents was legal and proper, which is already a very difficult argument to make, given everything we know about how he obtained them and refused to return them, the act of trying to hide those documents from investigators and obstruct their investigation is itself a completely separate and independent crime that could send him to federal prison for years, regardless of whether the underlying document possession was lawful or not. Now, prosecutors have what they say is a recording of Trump discussing exactly that kind of concealment strategy and obstruction planning in his own voice, using his own words that cannot be attributed to anyone else or blamed on some overzealous aide who was acting without his knowledge. Legal experts and former prosecutors are using phrases like textbook obstruction and slam dunk evidence and smoking gun when they talk about this recording because it is exactly the kind of direct and unambiguous evidence that prosecutors dream about, finding and that defendants have absolute nightmares about having used against them. Most obstruction of justice cases have to be built on circumstantial evidence and reasonable inferences drawn from conduct and testimony from witnesses whose credibility and motivations can be attacked and undermined by skilled defense lawyers. But when you have the defendant himself on tape discussing the obstruction in his own words, the case becomes exponentially stronger for the prosecution and exponentially harder for the defense to overcome, no matter how talented the lawyers are. The courtroom reaction when this recording played tells you everything you need to know about how powerful this evidence is and how damaging it is to Trump's defense going forward. Jurors who have been sitting through weeks of testimony and exhibits and legal arguments and who have probably gotten pretty good at maintaining neutral facial expressions suddenly showed visible and unmistakable signs of shock and intense attention that they could not hide or suppress. Observers in the courtroom reported that multiple jurors were leaning forward in their seats, physically drawn toward the speakers that were playing Trump's voice, as if they could not believe what they were hearing. Some reportedly had their mouths open in apparent disbelief and astonishment at the words coming out of those speakers. All 12 of them were focused with laser intensity on every single word as the recording played, capturing what sounded like a former president of the United States planning criminal obstruction of justice. And then there was Trump himself sitting at the defense table just a few feet from the jury box as his own voice filled the courtroom and echoed off the walls. Observers described him as completely frozen in place, not moving a muscle, not reacting visibly, not whispering to his lawyers, not doing anything except sitting there motionless with a pale and drained expression on his face as he absorbed the horrible reality that his own recorded words were being used against him in front of the 12 people who will vote on whether he goes to prison. Let us break this down into the key points you absolutely need to understand about what happened in that courtroom and why this recording could be such a complete game changer for this entire case and for Trump's legal future and political future more broadly going forward. The prosecution played a previously unknown audio recording that allegedly captures Trump in his own voice, discussing a deliberate plan to conceal classified documents and obstruct the federal investigation into his handling of those extremely sensitive materials after he left the White House. This is not secondhand testimony from a witness who might have their own motivations or credibility problems or axes to grind against Trump personally. This is not some document that could have been forged or fabricated by his enemies. This is allegedly Trump's own voice on tape discussing what legal experts say sounds exactly like textbook obstruction of justice. That kind of direct and unambiguous evidence is incredibly rare in criminal cases, and it is incredibly powerful when it does exist because there is really no way to explain it away or attack its credibility the way you can attack a human witness. The recording was reportedly obtained through a cooperating witness from Trump's inner circle, or possibly even through a lawyer from Trump's own defense team who decided to flip and work with prosecutors against their own client. This represents a massive and devastating breach in the wall of loyalty and secrecy that Trump has always relied on throughout his entire career to protect himself from legal consequences for his actions. Someone who was close to him, someone who had direct access to private and sensitive conversations that were supposed to stay secret forever, made the conscious decision that they could no longer stay silent about what they knew and handed over evidence that could potentially send Trump to federal prison for years. If Trump cannot trust the people closest to him to keep his secrets and protect him, then his entire defense strategy of denying everything and attacking the credibility of his accusers becomes much more difficult to sustain with any credibility. Trump visibly froze in his seat and went pale when the recording played in open court, which tells you that even he recognized immediately and instinctively how damaging this evidence is to his case and his chances of acquittal. Trump is many things, and you can say many things about him, but he is absolutely not stupid about legal matters after spending decades involved in litigation of all kinds. He has been sued hundreds of times, and he has sued other people hundreds of times, and he understands how trials work and how evidence works. He clearly understood in that terrible moment when his own voice started playing through those courtroom speakers that his own words on tape were being used to potentially put him in prison for years. His physical reaction, frozen completely motionless with a drained and pale face, was the reaction of someone who has been caught and knows they have been caught and cannot think of any way out. You cannot fake that kind of visceral response, and you cannot spin it away after the fact, no matter how good your communications team is. Everyone in that courtroom saw Trump's reaction, and they all understood exactly what it meant. The jurors showed visible and unmistakable signs of shock and intense attention when the recording played, which suggests strongly that this evidence is landing with exactly the devastating impact that prosecutors were hoping for when they decided to play it in open court. Jurors in high-profile cases like this one usually get pretty good over time at maintaining neutral and unreadable expressions because they know that people are watching them constantly and trying to read their reactions and figure out which way they are leaning on the verdict. But this recording apparently broke through that professional composure and got visible reactions from multiple jurors that they could not suppress or hide. When jurors are literally leaning forward in their seats with their mouths hanging open and their eyes locked intensely on the evidence being presented, that is a very bad sign for the defendant and a very good sign for the prosecution team. Trump's lawyers immediately requested an emergency recess from the judge, which is classic crisis mode behavior that tells you very clearly the defense team was completely blindsided by this evidence and does not have an immediate answer for how to deal with it. When your lawyers are asking for emergency breaks in the middle of the prosecution's presentation of their case against you, it means something has gone catastrophically wrong, and they need time desperately to figure out how to respond and whether there is any possible way to minimize the damage that has already been done. The fact that the defense team apparently did not know this recording existed or did not know it would be played during trial suggests either a major failure in the discovery process or a last-minute evidence reveal that caught absolutely everyone off guard. Where does this leave Trump, and what happens next in this trial that has suddenly taken such a dramatic and potentially devastating turn for the defendant? Well, the defense has to figure out some way to address this recording. Right now, sitting here today, it is genuinely hard to see what that strategy could possibly be. They cannot claim the recording is fake or manipulated without presenting actual evidence to support that claim. Voice analysis would quickly confirm whether it is really Trump on that tape. They cannot attack the credibility of a witness when the witness is essentially Trump himself speaking in his own words on audio tape. They could try to argue that the recording was obtained illegally and should be excluded from evidence, but that ship has almost certainly sailed if the judge already allowed it to be played in open court in front of the jury. They could try to argue that Trump's words on the tape do not actually mean what they sound like they mean, and that he was speaking hypothetically or joking or being taken out of context. But that is going to be an incredibly tough sell when the jury heard what they heard with their own ears and watched Trump freeze in apparent shock when he heard it too. The reality is this recording may have fundamentally changed the trajectory of this entire trial in a way that simply cannot be undone. No matter how skilled Trump's lawyers are, juries remember bombshell moments like this one. They remember seeing defendants freeze in visible shock and go pale. They remember hearing defendants appear to incriminate themselves in their own words and their own voice. They carry those powerful memories with them into the deliberation room when they sit down together to decide guilty or not guilty on each count in the indictment. Trump is not completely out of this fight yet, and criminal trials can take unexpected turns in both directions, as evidence continues to come in and lawyers make their arguments. But right now, in this moment, after what happened in that courtroom with that devastating recording, things look very, very bad for the former and current president of the United States. Keep watching this story extremely closely, because we are witnessing history unfold in real time, and the next few days and weeks could determine whether a president goes to prison for the first time in American history. The implications of this moment extend far beyond just this trial. The fact that someone in Trump's orbit chose to cooperate with prosecutors and provide this recording suggests that the wall of silence around Trump may be crumbling in ways that could have consequences for other investigations and other cases. If one person came forward, who else might follow? If one recording existed, what other recordings might be out there that have not yet surfaced? These are the questions that Trump and his legal team must be asking themselves right now, and the answers cannot be comforting. The political implications are equally significant. This trial is unfolding while Trump is serving as president, which means every development is being watched closely by members of both parties, by foreign leaders, by the American public. A conviction based on such powerful evidence would be politically devastating and would fundamentally alter Trump's ability to govern effectively. His opponents would have even more ammunition to use against him. His supporters would have to confront the reality of his actions in a way that becomes much harder to dismiss or explain away. The country would have to grapple with the unprecedented situation of a sitting president being convicted of serious federal crimes. But even beyond the political and legal implications, there is something deeply significant about what happened in that courtroom that speaks to the broader health of American democracy and the rule of law. The fact that a president can be held accountable for his actions, that the legal system can function even when the defendant is the most powerful person in the country. That evidence can be presented and considered fairly by a jury of ordinary citizens. All of that speaks to the strength of American institutions and the resilience of the rule of law. No matter what happens next in this trial, the fact that it is happening at all, that the legal system is functioning as it should, is itself a testament to the principles that have sustained American democracy for centuries. Trump's fate is now in the hands of the 12 jurors who heard that recording, who saw his reaction, who will deliberate on the evidence presented over the course of this trial. They have a weighty responsibility, and they will have to decide whether the prosecution has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. The recording will be central to that decision. It is the kind of evidence that cannot be ignored or explained away. The kind of evidence that can tip the scales decisively in favor of conviction. And as we wait for that verdict, as we watch this historic trial unfold, we should remember that what is happening in that courtroom is about more than just one man. It is about whether the principle that no one is above the law actually means what it says. The newly played audio recording, which visibly stunned Trump in court, will be a turning point in the trial heard by the jury and now part of the permanent record. His own words may be what finally brings him down, and this moment will define his legacy regardless of the final verdict.